Welcome back to another edition of the Edge podcast. Publisher Brenden Slaughter here for BeaversEdge.com. Back with you guys for another edition of the podcast. We got a special edition today, joined by the entire BeaversEdge.com staff. TJ Mathewson back as always here on the podcast, but also bringing on Dylan Callaghan-Croley, our recruiting beat writer extraordinaire. Dylan, welcome back to the pod, man. It's been a while since you and I jumped on for the recruiting edition a couple months ago. TJ and I are regulars on it. It's awesome that we were finally able to link up and get all three of us on the podcast. We're definitely going to be diving into a whole bunch of topics today. We're going to be teasing spring football a little bit as it starts next week. We're also going to be diving into the Pac-12 media rights and pretty much just kind of going roundtable and seeing what we think is going to happen, what can happen, and perhaps what ultimately will happen, as it really seems like the Pac-12 is in dire straits of needing to get a media deal in order. So again, thanks for tuning into this edition of the podcast. TJ, we'll go ahead and start with you, man. How are things? How are things down with K-Joe and Corvallis?
Good. I am looking forward to spring football, though. I don't even know the first spring practice to be able to go to. I'll need to map that out with you. But it's next Tuesday, so
yeah.
That's exciting stuff. Are you going to be down there, Brenden? I hope you're going to be down there because I can't be there.
Oh yeah. No, I just kind of like last year. I kind of assumed that the early parts of March are usually a little tighter for you, and as April comes around, you become a little bit more available. So, I'm all set up for next week. And TJ, I wouldn't miss DJU for anything.
No, you're not going to miss DJ.
First practice, I don't care if he, is throwing the ball into the net and they don't have pads on or nothing, man. I am excited to write about anything we can with DJU. So yeah, like you said, spring football, just right around the corner. BeaversEdge.com is going to have exclusive coverage. And also want to welcome in Dylan. Dylan, good to have you back on the pod, man. How are things with you? And are you ready for a little spring football for Oregon State? And how are things been going on the recruiting side, man?
Yeah, it's been going good. Busy as always. We talk every day about how busy it's been. We're coming out of a slow recruiting month here in February, which is never fun. But with the end of February now, and as we head into the heart of March here, recruiting is about to pick up. The dead period's over. Kids are getting back on campuses. Oregon State is going to have a ton of kids on campus this month. We'll certainly have a list here in the upcoming day or so on Beaver's Edge about all those kids who will be on campus, and it's only going to expand from here. And before you know it, we're going to get into official visit season, and it's going to be a busy next few months here on Beaver's Edge on the recruiting side of things. And I think Oregon State is in a good spot going forward in 2024 recruiting class, coming off a top 60 class in 2023. Obviously, already have one commitment in the class, and I think there are going to be some more here in the next 2 or 3 months.
That's awesome and good to hear, from Oregon State building up a bit of a momentum on the recruiting trail, because we're going to get into, the Pac-12 media rights. And, Dylan will probably lean towards you to kind of start on the topic when we get there, just ultimately what the recruiting impact could be with this media rights deal. And eventually after next year, what it's going to be like when you maybe won't be able to turn on typical cable and maybe see your Pac-12 team. And that, is obviously going to have an impact in recruiting. But TJ, let's go ahead and start with you. Just kind of what's the latest you've heard kind of on this Pac-12 media deal, where it stands currently from the last time you and I spoke last week? Obviously, as far as I know, it's still the same thing. The streaming services that are out there, maybe a little renewed interest in Apple TV Plus, a report out there of Ion TV, whether or not you want to take it for what it is or not. A lot of smoke and mirrors. What do you think is actually true right now?
Well, right now, I'd say my best guess is Ion TV is it just sounds fake. It doesn't it?
Yeah.
It just sounds fake.
It sounds like a reach.
I just can't buy it.
Yeah.
I just can't. I cannot fathom a situation where that's what the Pac-12 is going to result to.
Sure.
So I'm going to regard that report. I know Brett McMurphy's got he gets lots of things correct. There's a reason he does his job very well. However, I don't know if that was maybe like a Big 12 executive, like whispering in his ear and
Sure.
and stirring the pot on social media to get people, getting more down on the Pac-12.
Sure.
Or maybe it was a Pac-12 executive telling George Kliavkoff to hurry up and negotiate these rights with,
Sure.
some bogus report that comes out. I just can't believe I don't believe that report very much. I don't. So that leaves us at the point where it seems like right now the deal is probably going to get done sometime in the next 3 weeks. You would think so. You mentioned it before this podcast started. There's bad press coming up about the conference every single day, and you just can't keep having that. You need to have something. You need to have something in place, and it's going to come out in the next few weeks, which I predict it's going to be about half streaming and it's going to be half network television. Remember, ESPN still needs that 10:30 p.m. Eastern time slot filled. That slot remains open throughout all their other deals with the Big 12 and the SEC. That 10:30 p.m. slot remains open. That is the Pac-12 slot. That will be part of their media rights deal. It's where the rest of their games are going to be on,
right?
Which is what I wonder. Which streaming service is it going to be? Is it going to be Apple or Amazon? It's probably going to be a good majority of games on Apple TV and then the rest of them plugged into that late night ESPN slot. One last thing. I mean, I think I said this to you before, but like the reason a conference is where it is right now, this is what happens when you're not aggressive in growth and aggressive thinking forward. The conference likes to say it's very progressive and open-minded and forward-thinking conference in terms of a lot of things. But in terms of actually putting like foot to action of surviving as a group and putting together the best business opportunities for your schools that can also help your student athletes as that money comes down throughout all the other sports, the conference has been easily the worst of all the Power 5 conferences to do that. Which is the only conference that has not been aggressive to expand out of the four? Which one? Oh, Pac-12. That's it. That's it. It's the only one. The only one.
I mean, the only counter argument I would say to that is when, they were slightly ahead of the curve at first when they expanded with Colorado and Utah some, 10, longer than that now, my goodness, and make sure I do it right. Some 12 or so years ago.
11 years, I think.
Yeah. 11, and, and then, at the time, Larry Scott was, kind of heralded as being forward thinking, as you mentioned, TJ. And then it just kind of like cascaded into this so quickly. They got so far behind the 8 ball. And, I'm kind of curious. Do you think that it's more, is this on George Kliavkoff for what he's done in his tenure, or is this still lingering from how much you were handcuffed by Larry Scott? And I think that's maybe a fair question.
The reason the media rights are in this place is because of George Kliavkoff. He's the one negotiating this. This is his job, right? It's his administration in there who said, we're taking this to open market. You know what the Big 12 did? They didn't take it to open market. They went to their current partners, were like, hey, let's make this work. Boom. Big 12 has a deal done. $2.2 billion, $31.5 million per school. The Pac-12 is not getting that. They're not. They went and said, hey, we will re-up with you and get on television. We know we're getting on television. We're getting years done. And we expanded. We added good schools with good markets and good fan bases into our conference. And we're going to add on to that and secure a media rights deal. And the Pac-12 has done neither of those two things. Neither of them.
Right. And
it is like it is a number of things when you sit back and you think it's like, well, did you think you were too good for expansion or something? You didn't think that there are any schools that would reach your standard? Because you look at the 4 schools in the Big 12 that the Big 12 expanded to. I think all those 4 schools would be a better addition than SMU or San Diego State. All 4 of them.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think the Pac-12 is certainly picking up the pieces, so to speak, when that's there. And, I mean, no disrespect to San Diego State, who I think can be pretty competitive both academically and, they typically challenge most Pac-12 teams in non-conference and football. I mean, Kawhi Leonard's a solid basketball alum, and their baseball program's usually pretty solid most years. I know that's just the big 3 right off the bat, but, SMU, it's a different story, right? And, we'll get into that a little bit. But before we go back and kind of look at maybe the positives and negatives of both Amazon and Apple TV Plus, Dylan, I'm curious to get your take because you've got your toe in kind of some of the other conferences. You're more, you're a little bit more wide ranging across the United States than TJ and I here based on the West Coast. What is the perception of the Pac-12 right now from where you sit? And is it kind of like as dire as TJ and I kind of making it out to be from the national lens?
Yeah, it's pretty bad. I'm not gonna beat around the bush. It's pretty bad. I would say the Pac-12 outside of, and it's only for another season, outside of really USC is not really viewed kindly. It's a kind of an afterthought for most people out here. Now, your hardcore college football fans absolutely will still talk about the Pac-12 quite a bit and have a better perception of it because those are your fans who are staying up on the East Coast and in
Sure,
the Central watching Pac-12 after dark every
sure,
Saturday
yeah,
night. But for your more casual fan, it is absolutely a little bit of an afterthought. Now, I think from a recruiting perspective, it is not as bad. Those recruits have a little bit more of an open mind than your normal casual fan.
sure,
They tend to look at things as the big picture and not really worry too much about perception. Sure, there are some kids out there that are going to want to, if it's between, let's say, Washington State and Texas Tech. They may pick Texas Tech over Washington State because the Big 12 right now has a little bit of a better perception or may have some more eyes on it right now.
sure,
And that could, be decided on this next television deal, which I think is going to maybe have a decent impact to a degree on recruiting as well, because a lot of kids can't get on campus before official visits happen. They just don't have the money to be traveling across the
sure.
country multiple weekends a month, let alone, or sorry, a year, let alone
It's
a month.
expensive to travel. It's expensive to
Yeah,
travel, man.
I mean, I talked to some recruits who have over the next 2 months are visiting six, seven, eight different colleges, all across the country, and it's amazing that I can't even fathom how much money it costs to be
Yeah,
traveling thousands of miles
sure.
in a 2 month span
That's a good
on your own
airline credit
dime.
card. That's a good airline credit card, let me
It
tell you.
certainly is. So I do wonder how much recruiting will be impacted by the next
Sure,
Pac-12 television deal, because if it is on a streaming service, not everybody is going to have those streaming services unless it's free, which perhaps it will be. That would change a little bit, but if it's behind a paywall per se, it's definitely going to have somewhat of an impact because kids aren't going to be able to, tune into any game any weekend and check out a team that they're possibly interested in. But overall, the recruiting impact probably not as big as some will think, but it
sure.
will definitely affect some kids because you are bringing down your ability to spread the message per se of your program, even if it's just for 3 hours on a Saturday on television.
For sure. No, I mean those
Right.
it's go ahead, TJ. Yeah.
I was going to say, and I'm thinking of it from a recruit's perspective. I think the big difference between a casual fan and a recruit is the fan. What we're worried about is like the sport of college football. I don't really think a recruit has that really in mind. If they think if
Sure.
when Dylan says big picture, they mean big picture of an education or playing in the NFL, not
Yeah.
hey, how's college football going to look in 10 years with all these conferences? That's not really,
Yeah.
I would say, not really a thought of what they think of.
And
So
the only other thing I would put with that is that in today's college football landscape that could affect it down the road is NIL, because the bigger the television deal, the more
right.
money
Sure.
to go around. Now schools can't give players money directly, but uh,
Uh-huh.
in today's college football,
TJ,
there's obviously
Sure thing.
ways and
TJ just goes off
programs.
screen.
Did you
There,
guys
there are
catch
certainly ways.
their first NIL ruling this week, where they're like, yeah, let's go after it hard. We're gonna get women's basketball and just kill them.
Yeah, no, I saw that. I
Right.
did see
Okay.
that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Big bad
Um,
NCAA. Hey, Mark Emmert's last day was yesterday. Should we give him a round of applause for all the
We
hard work
pop
he's done?
pop some
I don't think
champagne.
anybody's upset about that one.
But no, sorry, Dale,
But
go
yeah,
ahead. Go.
no. I mean, obviously, schools can't give players money directly, but there are definitely ways. Some of those schools who maybe don't play by the rules, funnel money elsewhere
Sure.
and make it look a little bit better. So it could affect things when it comes to NIL, and depending on what type of NIL deal it is with who that ability to be on certain types of television or streaming services each week could play, a little bit of a factor because it's where the athlete's showing up the most
Yeah.
or the least.
Sure. No, and I think kind of, piggybacking off that a little bit, I think, and I'm curious to see what you guys think with this. So the nice thing of it is if we follow this to its conclusion and assume, like TJ said, the big games will get the late night ESPN slot, that will largely stay the same. So that leaves us between Apple and Amazon. The good news with both, gentlemen, those are two of the most known brands in the world. Not the United States, not Oregon, not Corvallis, the world. And more specifically, two mega huge companies that are based in Seattle and Cupertino, respectively. West Coast, you could probably throw a rock from Stanford's campus to the Apple Circular Building. I'm paraphrasing, of course. Seattle, I would assume that TJ, back me up. How far are we away from
across the lake?
So there you go.
UW, across the lake.
Okay. So with all that, I guess, at least with that, that it's like, those two companies or at least have some exposure, and more so than Apple because, I don't want to venture to guess on how many, but I would assume that, a good amount of people, know Apple from either their products or so on and so forth. More people, I think, would have the ability to see games on Amazon. Because let me ask you this, gentlemen. Are both of you Prime members?
My dad is.
Okay.
So yes.
Yeah, my parents are. So yeah, I am too.
So if that paywall, like you were talking about, Dylan, doesn't exist, and it's just, kind of like we did for Thursday Night Football on, NFL this year, which I'm sure it kind of irked people for a week or two, and then the people that wanted to watch it were like, oh, that's how I get my packages shipped to my front door in 2 days. Click, click. I mean, I get what you're kind of getting at, but do you think there could be removing the maybe paywall inhibiting? Am I on to something here, fellas, or am I reaching?
Yeah.
I Dylan, go ahead first if you want to.
No, you go ahead first.
All right. Well, I say the thing I think about, like Brenden, you're saying they're like, yes, there's positives about it. The positives aren't necessarily the experience. It's not necessarily the concept of buying it. It is like just being able to see it, right? You're still like all the people who watch sports on network television, by the way, which is one big reason why network television still exists, is because of sports. It's not because of Ion TV shows like Blue Blood and Chicago PD and stuff like that.
All the best TV shows are moving on to streaming now. I dare anybody to tell me any differently. So I mean,
that's what I'm saying. That's right, and it's like it's not like streaming is necessary. It's not like it's a complicated way to think about it, because it's like, well, it doesn't, just because shows are more popular on streaming service doesn't necessarily mean sports are more popular on streaming services. If you get what I'm saying, live sports, maybe you would prefer it to be on a television live in front of you and not like, hey, I have to pull up my laptop and plug it into an HDMI or aircast it to aircast it to my television to watch the sport. It's just that, it's that extra step, which a lot of people, frankly, don't even bother taking nowadays, if you think about it. Yeah, but in terms of the positives, you're right. I mean, anyone who watches Ted Lasso, like how many people watch Ted Lasso? How many millions of people watch Ted Lasso, right? You can all watch, the MLS now is on Apple TV. That deal just started this year, I think this week, right? When the MLS kicked off. The Apple TV has rights to the MLS, I think over the course of the next 10 years. Well, so it's not like these streaming services want to add more sports. It's just if it is actually good for the sports viewership that it's on there, regardless of what the company is, because the companies will make money no matter what. We know that ESPN, for example, hemorrhages money every year because
they're owned by
the
Disney,
amount of money.
So it's they're owned by Disney,
right.
So it's house and mouse.
So it doesn't matter,
man.
Right? It doesn't really matter as much. But ESPN as a whole doesn't make a whole lot of money off of that. But when you balance it out with the fact they're owned by Disney, and then Amazon makes a ton of money as well. So
Yeah, I
I don't
mean,
know, kind of rambled on there a little bit.
No, for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
no, I mean that's
And
what this is. That's definitely what this is. And Dylan, just real quick, the disappointing thing, and maybe not because I don't know if they have the infrastructure for it, but if we're talking about pure reach, that's why I was always disappointed to never see Netflix even kind of ever entered into these negotiations seriously, because as much as I talk about Ted Lasso, as much as, we talk about Prime, Netflix still leads the way by, I don't want to say an ocean, but
not for much longer.
fair
They're going to
point.
kick
But
half their user base off their
for sure,
platform.
yeah, I mean, for sure. But like, I think, you kind of can tell anybody, hey, it's on Netflix, and that's kind of the most
Right.
universally known. Then I think you kind of get to Prime and then maybe Apple. But, just a little thought that came into my mind. Dylan, yeah, over to your point.
no, yeah, I got a couple here. So going back to what I previously said about how the deals could affect each school, even be on NIL, which it obviously doesn't affect it directly, but what it will affect directly for schools is that amount of money they receive, which goes into upgrading your facilities, upgrading your
Mm-hmm.
stadium, upgrading whatever it may
Yep.
be, adding things, whatever. And in today's college football recruiting, it's an arms race for facilities. If you
Yep.
don't have the facilities, you may not win the recruits. So that's something worth noting. Going back to streaming, I used to watch. Now Thursday night football obviously never had great games before, but I used to still watch Thursday night football quite a bit. But
Sure.
this year I watched it. I think the only time I watched Thursday night football was I think the Eagles played on there once, and I
Oh,
think
wow.
maybe
Okay.
once or two other games. I mean, I did not tune into Thursday night football because
Interesting.
it's another step that, like, if it was a game that I didn't want to watch before, maybe there was nothing else on, I would turn it on, and
Sure.
it's whatever because it was on cable, it's ease of access. But uh if there was nothing on cable, and like, yeah, I could go to the football game, but maybe I didn't want to take that extra step all the time to, have to go to the Amazon app. And I know it's only a few seconds, but it,
Sure.
it's it's that ease of access that TJ was talking about that it just won't be there. And the other thing is, I think streaming services can be used well for sports as like a supplemental type thing. Like the Big Ten and their new TV deal is using Peacock for a
Yeah.
handful of games each week, but that's supplemental to, being on Fox, being
And
on
CBS.
FS1,
Yeah.
CBS,
Yep.
NBC,
and then yeah.
Yep.
early
So
morning NBC before Notre Dame.
Ye-
That's a pretty
Yep.
big spot.
Yep. Oh, yeah.
exactly. So you're getting to be on four different networks, and then you have Peacock for the leftover games. So I guess I would be intrigued with Amazon or Apple is if there is a portion, which I imagine there have to be, somewhat on cable, because I just I are they really going, like, how are they going to, from just a logistical standpoint, are they going to hire four, five, six different broadcast teams broadcasting a
So,
bunch of games at once if
so
it's on streaming service?
the way that I see that potentially working out the easiest is whoever will bid to essentially, I'm trying to think, like, franchise. I don't even know if that's the right term here, but just take over the Pac-12 network studios and essentially keep it
Yeah,
in place. The
Right.
broadcasting talent that's in place,
sure.
that is, the Yogi Raw, the whole crew. But I think it would be under perhaps Pac-12 Networks brought to you by Apple. Pac-12 Networks brought to you by Amazon, or maybe even
Well,
more than, I don't know. I don't know exactly, but I think
I
they
don't
could
think
use that
I think it would be
infrastructure.
I think it would be a separate entity, would it not? I feel like it would be Amazon coverage would be separate from Pac-12 Network. Although I think if Pac-12 Network got bought out, that would be the greatest thing that
That's
conference
what
has
I'm
ever
saying, is
done in their
maybe they could
history.
buy out the rights and operate it themselves, kind of a thing. No, I don't know.
Maybe, but I don't think that's how the rights would work. The
Fair
rights would
enough.
be that
Yeah, yeah.
Amazon would get probably 2 games a week to put on theirs. The Pac-12 Network would get their regular 2 games a week that they normally put, 2 or 3 games depending on
Sure.
when they put it on their network. but we know how hard the Pac-12 network is to watch. It's probably harder to watch the Pac-12 network than it is to watch on a streaming service.
Oh yeah, It might be harder
and then
to
the
find
remaining
Pac-12
game is
than
probably
mine.
on, and the remaining game's probably on ESPN, like the late night game.
I
So
totally
think
forgot
about it. It's
the
not.
Pac-12
I don't.
network.
Yeah, I don't know if it's as much of a logistical thing as Dylan said. You know, they'd probably have to invest a little bit more for college football coverage. But again, the streaming platforms are investing in sports. The problem is if you can make if that's really like, is this the new technology that really works? Is this the what will get more people to watch it because we can make it a better experience and it's more convenient for them to, hey, pull it up on your phone like this, boom. That would be one thing that would actually be much easier. If you're a member, you have it on your phone. I mean, you can't pull up a cable unless you're connected to your home Wi-Fi on your phone, right? I don't think so.
Sure.
Well, I guess in the ESPN app you could, but other ones,
Well, and the thing is, I don't think that they're going to make silly decisions from a fiscal standpoint, but you know, that's the thing that, you know, I think that was like the ultimate goal of George Klebkoff when he went to these negotiations is, fellas, I mean, who, if they wanted to, could outbid Amazon or Apple? Like I said a couple minutes ago, these are two of the richest companies in the world.
But it's not even about outbidding. It's how much would they pay is the question. Because if Apple and Amazon don't have anyone to bid against, well, why would they give the Pac-12 $40 million?
It's true. That's where I think you have
to
find. Well, you have to play them against each other and find that middle ground, right?
But they wouldn't do that. They wouldn't do that because they know they could get it at a discount rate.
Dylan?
And this brings up two more thoughts. One, and the logistics thing is what TJ said. I absolutely agree with, and I was off on this, but that actually brings up a whole different issue, which it goes back to the whole how the Pac-12 network outside of Pac-12 areas is completely non-existent, and that anybody outside the Pac-12 completely forgets about it, which streaming services would absolutely help with, because then, you know, somebody on the East Coast or in the Central could actually watch it. But I think I asked you before, Brenden, but you guys got the Big Ten network out there.
We can get it, yeah.
And yep. I was going to say, Dylan, at home when I was in high school, my parents had all the sports channels. We had Big Ten, we had SEC, we had, the ACC once it launched. We had the Longhorn Network.
Nice.
Right? I mean, everything readily available at your fingertips.
Well, that was Comcast.
So,
right?
like that, and it was Comcast Xfinity. And, Comcast, you get the Pac-12 network with.
You do.
So, I mean, I don't know how it would be with. That was essentially just me bragging about my channels, which I apologize to sound like a snobby. I'm not going to swear on this podcast. Just to say, it was not that hard to get those channels, as far away from Big Ten country in Seattle as you could possibly get.
Yeah, and I think, and that's the other thing, is if they could find a way to make the Pac-12 network more national via these streaming services, then it would absolutely be a home run. But I also agree with how much are they actually going to be willing to pay, because now that USC and UCLA are leaving, and God knows who else may leave in the future, how much are they willing to actually put up? Because in the end, you're going from having USC, UCLA, which are two more national programs, bring in big name exposure to much, and there's still Oregon, but if Oregon would to leave, there's not many national brand names out there.
If Oregon and Washington left, I think this conference would have a really hard time surviving. Put it that way.
No, it wouldn't. I don't think it would survive. I think at that point, the four Southern schools, the Mountain schools, and the Arizona schools would defect to the Big Ten, and the rest would probably be left to fight for themselves. If that's what I were to guess, the number I saw when I was looking it up, the Pac-12, if USC and UCLA would have stayed, I think the bottom number was $50 million per year per school if the two LA schools stayed.
Wow. And now they're trying to get 30.
They're trying to get 25,
Yeah.
And the other thing to mention of this is and it's not really on the media rights, but more so the future is the Big Ten isn't done expanding here. And right now, the Big Ten obviously doesn't have a commissioner.
Mm-hmm.
And this new commissioner is going to decide a lot about the landscape of not just the Big Ten, but the Pac-12 and a lot of
Sure.
college football as a whole. So I'm just interested because there's going to have to be some type of language in this upcoming TV deal about if the Big Ten chooses to expand and take so and so school. It's going to be interesting from that as well. And the chance that the Pac-12 could lose other schools is probably going to keep the money down as well, because unless there's a way to keep those schools locked into the Pac-12 for the entire length of the contract, that's a major risk if you could possibly lose
Sure.
Oregon and Washington. But even if they would lose just to lose to Oregon, that would be a huge hit.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it all shakes out, because I think the longer that it doesn't, find a resolution, and we were kind of talking about it a little bit earlier in the podcast, is, when can you expect something like this or something, news on this to actually come to be? And I think within the next couple of weeks is reasonable. TJ kind of hints at. I've heard the same thing, that there could be something around the Pac-12 men's basketball tournament, but who knows? Maybe that's just smoke and mirrors, and that has to be something that's ultimately, negotiated and finalized for them to be able to announce it, So
I have a quick question for you too, quick.
Yeah.
I saw an article on Forbes last week, and I just want to get your thoughts on it as Pac-12 residents, lifelong Pac-12 people, was that after they figure out this media deal, the Pac-12 needs to come to some sort of talk with the ACC about, like an alliance as the Big Ten and the Pac-12 had, but something, alliance, merger, whatever you want to have it. Do you think that something like that is in the cards potentially in the future for the Pac-12? Because that would be one way to survive and try to counteract any type of another program.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
I don't think it's going to happen, Dylan, but we talked about it a little bit on our radio show this week, and I think it would be good for the Pac-12, because the ACC is kind of in a different way being held out of the party right now, because their next media rights is so far down the road. They're locked in, but they're not being talked about in a real positive way either, like these other conferences are. So if there was a possibility for it to come together, great. But what from George Kliavkoff has shown that they're going to get something like that done. So I guess I'm not very optimistic, but if it were to happen in any capacity, I that's what my goal, as far as, all that, my goal is to essentially, just keep the conference together, as silly and premature as that may be, fellas.
It doesn't logistically seem possible. It does not. And the problem is when you do that, if you open up the door to say, hey, let's merge the two. But when you open the door, not only you're opening the door to give the ACC schools a lifeline to sort of combine forces, all the big brands of the ACC are gone. Like they're not staying. They're not partnering with Washington State and Oregon State. They're going to get a payday in the SEC where they know they can get paid an exorbitant amount of money. Florida State, Miami, Clemson, pick one other ACC school that you think would go to the Southeastern Conference, and that would be it. So I just don't think the ceiling is really there for that.
Yeah, it's certainly, like I said, I think there's a lot of things still in play, and, maybe the Pac-12 still has an ace up their sleeve, that's hopefully not on TV. I choose to continue to, choose, a positive line of thinking, but until, we hear anything, that's just continuing. What it's going to be is speculation on the part of all of us. So, ultimately, we didn't even get a chance in this podcast to be able to get into everything we want to talk about. We'll almost have to have another one checking in. And TJ, I'm sure you and I will be talking during spring football for sure. But yeah, fellas, what are just kind of your parting thoughts on this? What do you, just in a couple sentences or less, what do you think will ultimately happen here? Start with you, TJ.
It's grim. I don't have anything positive to say. There's nothing positive until I see it in writing and I see it asserted that the conference has made so many assurances and alliances to stay together, and we're this, we're that, and it has led to just this, which is not good.
Yeah. Dylan?
Uh, yeah, I'll just kind of go say what I think generally is going to happen in college football. I think in the next 10, 15 years, you're just going to have really two super conferences and then everybody else. And I think there's going to be quite a bit of teams from the ACC, the Big 12, and the Pac-12 that are left at kind of the door, and everybody else is going to be, having the party.
Yeah, I mean, either way, there's a lot coming up, and it's going to be exciting to, see what ultimately happens and what chips ultimately fall. So that'll go ahead and wrap up this edition of the Edge podcast. Make sure to stay locked into BeaversEdge.com. As Dylan mentioned early in the podcast, March is going to be a really busy month for visitors checking out Oregon State. So make sure to stay tuned for that. And as TJ and I were talking about as well, we'll be bringing you live coverage from Oregon State practices and whatnot. So make sure to be tuned into BeaversEdge.com. DJU coming to Corvallis, obviously, this spring. We're going to get the chance to see him, see how he fits into the offense. So lots of exciting times here at Beaver's Edge. Make sure to stay locked. Fellas, thanks for joining me. As always, looking forward to connecting up again soon.